Hi, good evening. My name is Heather Roberge. I'm the Interim Vice Chair of the UCLA Department of Architecture and Urban Design. Tonight is the first of our 2016-17 lecture series, and we have a very exciting series planned this year, organized by the chair, Neil Denari, and we hope you'll join us for one of our upcoming events. So next on the calendar, after tonight's lecture, next week on Tuesday and Wednesday, October 25th and 26th, Professor Hitoshi Abe has organized 2 evenings of lectures called Between East and West, which introduces 8 Japanese architects working today in a global world. Also, following that on Monday, October 31st, we have a lecture by Hiroshi Hara, who is currently teaching a visiting studio here in the department. And he is the 2016-2017 Terasaki Chair in U.S.-Japan Relations and a Professor Emeritus at University of Tokyo. So tonight we're honored at the opportunity to celebrate Bob Hale. He's an alumnus from the department, from the class of 1981. He's also the generous sponsor of the Anne Greenwald Traveling Prize. This prize annually supports talented architecture students who submit proposals to travel abroad and study the relationship between art and architecture in France and beyond. So Bob donated this prize in the memory of his late wife and has been doing so since 2011. And this year he's announced an endowment for this prize, which will support generations of students to come. So on behalf of the department and everyone gathered to here tonight, we'd like to thank you for this generous gift. And then also I'd like to introduce Kevin Daley, a faculty member in the department, who will introduce Bob. He knows him well from working with him from 1986 to 1990. Kevin Daley.
Yeah, so it's my pleasure to introduce Bob, my friend and colleague from Frank's office, and since then, Bob has been a central figure at the school and on the kind of scene in Los Angeles since moving here. As Heather said, has been a long-time proponent and supporter of the school through the fellowships you mentioned, but also as a critic and a visitor. Bob earned his first degree at Tulane and completed the master's program in 1981. During which time he started working with Frank Gehry. In his 12 years at the firm, he was involved in projects that established the reputation of the office during that era. The Temporary Contemporary, the Winton Guest House, one of the first of Frank's projects that involved breaking houses into small pavilions, and then moved on to the larger European projects as those began to take shape. Euro Disney, Vitro, and the American Center in Paris, which I actually remember with pretty mixed feelings working on many, many models of this thing we call the pineapple. Bob then joined Universal Studios and directed large and small projects there, including the well-known Universal headquarters building designed by Around the Pool House. And then joined Rios & Associates as a principal in 2001, continuing a collaboration with Mark Rios that began when Mark was designing the landscape for the Frank Gehry designed Eli Road house in Brentwood. And I look forward to seeing the work from that office, renamed Rios Clementi Hale in 2003 in tonight's lecture. One of the sustaining principles in architectural practice, let's see if this sounds familiar to you, is a belief in a kind of incrementalism. It's baked into how we expect design practices to grow and how we get work as architects. That 2 of these buildings and then 1 more kind of gives you a kind of expertise in a building type. And several projects of a certain size maybe makes you eligible for 1 project larger. And I think that kind of expectation for incremental growth is something that we all kind of understand and sort of intuitively expect that practices will grow in a predictable way and sometimes then settle into kind of a steady state. I think that's where Bob's professional biography kind of veers off the charts. Gary had a staff of 18 when I joined in 1986. I tried to find a photo from Facebook of when Frank won the Pritzker, and all 18 people could fit pretty easily within a single frame. But Bob was only 5 years out of UCLA at the time, and a principal already in the firm. So think about that as you think about your next 5 years after completing UCLA. What do you plan on doing? When he left to join Universal, the office, Frank's office, had grown to 75. Likewise, Rios' studio was well regarded when Bob joined. A well-known Los Angeles practice had a staff of about 24. That's pushing 100 now. And I would like to suggest that that kind of growth, the growth of those kinds of firms, is an indication that that increment can actually be very substantial. And I think it's a reflection of Bob's extraordinary skills as an architect and his capacity to take on the full range of roles demanded of architects today and solve the complex calculus of clients, regulatory politics, finance, construction technology, and design quality. So please welcome Bob back to AUD. Next one.
Start off, I need to acknowledge and thank many people, especially my family. I need to give a dedication to my late wife, wellness of the school, for her love and creative collaboration. And to my kids, Lizzie and James, who are now kids, both on county. As well to my current wife, whose love and support is always amazing to me. You'll see a little more about her when we talk. Additionally, I need to acknowledge two of my most important mentors. One is Charles Moore, which was the motivation for me coming here originally. And the other is Frank Gehry, who really basically just threw me into the deep end and gave me the kind of opportunities that most people don't get to have.
Hello.
So, you hear any better now? Yeah. Okay, good. So, inspiration from Charles. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to come here. Another was Los Angeles. I mean, we were talking just a little while ago. Who wouldn't want to live here? It's one of the most beautiful, awesome cities in the world. Beaches to mountains, some great built environment here, and some not so great built environment here. And this is one of the things that also drew me to Los Angeles. I grew up in Tampa, Florida. It's basically a giant suburb. And the notion that Los Angeles was built on that same model to some extent, in my perception then, and was going to be the place where you could see the transformation from that was part of the challenge I wanted to see coming here. And then as well, the kind of diversity that this city provides, which is, again, just really amazing. And so for the students here, I wanted to sort of connect back to UCLA. In my time here, there was a thing called the Urban Innovations Group, which I was fortunate enough to work with and work with Charles there. And in the winter of 1980, we did a competition that Harvey Perloff, the then dean, organized. And Rob McGuire, who is one of the largest developers here in Los Angeles, sponsored, called a Grand Avenue. And it was essentially a competition for the entire south side of Grand Avenue from Olive Street to 3rd Street. And Rob brought together, or actually Harvey advised Rob in bringing together this constellation of architects, including Charles Barton Myers, Caesar Pelli, Frank Gehry, Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer, Lawrence Halprin, Ricardo Legarreta, and Bob Kennard. So it was quite the constellation of star architects, and in fact, it's when Barton decided to move to Los Angeles, and Hardy Holzman Pfeiffer decided to open an office in Los Angeles. And this was the character of the project that we developed. There was this diversity of buildings that really had the same kind of richness as the city around it. Tall towers by Caesar Pelli, Barton Myers, pyramid shape by Caesar Pelli, and then going down the backside, spilling onto Olive, Frank's dance pavilions, and Charles Moore's housing. So that was what brought me here. I fast forward to when I started working with Mark. We currently are a partnership of 5 partners. I started working with Mark in 2001, the day actually before 9/11, kind of a memorable moment in most people's lives. And I have to say, my partners and I have a basis of commonality in that we were all trained as architects and are all licensed architects. But we all each have other significant training and experience. Mark's also a landscape architect. Frank Clementi went to Italy after school, and he worked with Ettore Sotsas and Matteo Thun doing product design. Julie, who worked, and actually Frank and Julie both worked for Craig for a while. So my experience with Frank and at Universal doing large-scale commercial and institutional projects as well as planning. So that's nice. And so we have what we call a transdisciplinary practice. It cuts across everything from architecture, landscape, urban design, graphics, product design, and materials. And those different disciplines influence each other, and we set up a retail entity called Not Mutual that is actually both a store and a brand, at which we have a myriad of housewares. And there's a relationship then between what we do as design studio versus what we do in the product world. And those two things relate to each other and influence each other. As Kevin said, we're currently an office of a little over 100. I'll hold this. So we work as individuals, but in collaboration with each other. This sort of gives the analogy. And our office on Larchmont is now bursting at the seams. I was just talking with Kevin about the fact that we're actually trying to move from here. Though it's been a wonderful space and a transformation of an old funky building that now connects nicely to the street where it didn't before. Has helped transform this whole north end of Larchmont. Going back to Grand Avenue, you can see on the sort of towers on the left and Grand Avenue coming up to the music center there, our park coming out from the music center, and this has been an area of Los Angeles that I've had sort of a career-long relationship to. When I started with Mark, he had just started the Not Neutral brand, and he also had just been given the job as Director of Landscape Architecture at USC, and had also just won the project to remodel the plaza at the Music Center and Grand Avenue in front of it. The idea was to really try and better connect the Music Center to the coming Disney Hall, which was at that point under construction, almost finished, and really had no relationship to the Music Center, even and especially for pedestrians. So our proposal basically was to raise the entire plaza so that the Dorothy Chandler and the Margaret Taper Forum were all at one level, and that it then we would insert these little pavilions on the plaza to provide amenities of a bar, a cafe, a restaurant, and then also open up the stairway in a way that would really help have a better relationship to the street. The Music Center at the time, and continuing today, is trying to dispel the image of elitism, of this sort of cultural thing up on the hill that's only for rich people, and really make it a much more accessible and open institution. We also were trying to widen Grand Avenue and give it a special character so that it could better connect to, like I said, the Disney Hall. We did get that part built back in 2002, and that, I think, it's helped a lot. We moved the street 20 feet to widen it. And then about 5 years later, the Music Center came back to us and asked us to help remodel the Mark Taper Forum. Those of you who've been around town for a while may remember how cramped and difficult it was as a facility. It had basically no lobby, had a men's and women's room that each had like 2 toilet stalls in it. And so this was a way of opening it up and having at least some semblance of a lobby. Raise the floor so that you could actually have accessibility, and it featured Tony Duquette's Alumni shell wall. We redid the theater inside to make it much more of a theater in the round, redoing the acoustics and the finished materials and the ceiling. And then actually built a whole other sort of building in the basement, in the parking structure, to provide new toilet facilities for women and men. I still have ladies who come up and thank me for doing that. We more than doubled the code required number of stalls for women at the time. And then returning to Grand Avenue, go back here, not so far away, up in the, I should have a pointer here, but, up in the upper right-hand corner is the site for our California Endowment project, literally walking distance away from Grand Avenue. This was our competition entry. It was based on the idea of really both fitting into the context, but providing the endowment with a great place to work that was open, transparent, the California Endowment is the second wealthiest private endowment in California. They have an amazing amount of money, and they are trying to be really great stewards of it. So this was a competition. In fact, actually, Craig and Ming were part of this competition. So we were fortunate enough to win. And our design evolved, trying to take into account the neighboring buildings, such as the terminal annex you can see in the back of this image. A building that we tried to break down into pieces that would relate to the surrounding scale, but also have large-scale pieces that related to the scale of Alameda Boulevard, and utilized a transparency as both a kind of literal and allegorical kind of value for the endowment. Having that much money, the notion of stewardship and transparency were really important to them. And additionally, in the big curtain wall of glass, we inserted these blue windows to kind of break up the simple form, but also to kind of assert the role of the identity of the individual. This is a big collective, but it also functions based on the individuals. The other pieces in the foreground are big meeting spaces that all organize around a courtyard. We were able to give the endowment a kind of 10,000 square foot courtyard that wasn't part of the program, but formed what's come to be a very important place for them to hold their events. And then on the north side of the building, we essentially pulled the building in so that there would be still a large parking lot with dirt underneath it, so that there could be additional building in the future. Again, as stewards of the site, the endowment really didn't need to build out anywhere near what the total allowable FAR would be. So they wanted us to master plan the site to allow for that kind of expansion. It's also, as a statewide organization, there was a kind of question of how could we not only connect to the context of Chinatown and Olivera Street, but to the whole state. And we developed a palette of rock that comes from all over California, the Central Valley, the Upper Coastal Range, the Sierras, the Mojave Desert, that we use then as exposed aggregate throughout the building. And you can see we also then brought in landscape elements from around California. There are a series of redwood trees that actually work very well here, and as well as California pepper trees from the Central Valley. And then the whole office building is organized around an atrium that allows a lot of light into the center of the building and really heightens the notion of transparency and the kind of connectedness of the workplace. Soon after the endowment was finished, we were asked to become part of a team to work on LA Live, what became LA Live, and to be the landscape architects for LA Live, which was sort of interesting because there's very little landscape ultimately involved. It's all open space, and so we developed Nokia Plaza, as it came to be known. And on our first meeting with a client, a guy named Tim Lyawicki, who headed up AEG at the time, we had these drawings laid out on the wall, and Tim walked into the conference room and so looked at all the drawings and went around, came over to the site plan and just scrawled with a big pen a $. And he turned to us all and said, "That's what this place is all about. Don't forget it." It's a little startling. It wasn't quite what we had in mind. But what we were able to show him was that we could do farmers markets here as well as premier events, do holiday events and that it could also be a place for the community. And as we were developing it, we were looking at how we could create the space based on just the notion of media, and develop these boards that were, in our mind, going to be active and make for a sort of complete media designed space. But of course, it turned out that that was way too expensive. And then ultimately, my partner, Frank Clementi, developed these notions of towers from which we could project things and things could be projected on them. And as well, we tried introducing the notion of water into the plaza to animate it when these big events weren't there. That ultimately wasn't able to be afforded. But the towers were, and they evolved into these kind of, I like to think of them as different kinds of characters, and they're almost like ballerinas in their proportion. So there are 6 towers that ring the central plaza. It's a 1-acre plaza that has sycamore trees and planters integrated in with the towers, and kind of makes for an organization that allows for big events in the middle and people to filter in and out on the sides. And then paving that goes throughout the entire site that ties it together. The towers were all fabricated off-site in the shop. They literally put wheels on them and towed them out to the site and erected them. We created the pattern for the paving with the understanding that, in fact, most people would probably know this place as an image from the air, from a Goodyear blimp, because of all the kinds of media events that happen here, and that it needed to be a kind of pattern that was strong enough to be recognizable, but didn't need to be really always continuous. And so there are many different kinds and scales of events that happen here, and it seems to have served AEG very well, but it also continues to serve the community. So, again, going back to Grand Avenue, this is Grand Park from the sky. Grand Avenue is there on the left. When we started this, the question was really what the notion of the park was really going to be, and we saw it as being really the center of LA County, and developed an understanding of who is LA County, and cribbed a lot of information from Tom's book and other sources. And you know, LA as a place is just really amazingly diverse. And so, you know, the challenge for us was how to incorporate that diversity into an open space like this. And what we came to was that the good fortune of Los Angeles is that it's really hospitable to an incredibly wide range of plants, and that we were able to take all these different areas that people are from and bring their planting to this place, and really develop a kind of palette for the park based on that. And then inserted into that these informational graphics that Deborah Sussman's office helped with. And revitalized the fountain that was existing there. That's really the main and only thing that was in the park before that remains there today. But we extended it and made it into a different kind of a fountain by having this kids' play area adjacent to it. And then, of course, the ubiquitous Starbucks that had to be in the park. But it, you know, makes for a kind of amenity for people who have to go to court every once in a while. It's probably one of the highest grossing Starbucks in the county. Most of the planning is very drought tolerant. And my partner Mark invented this pink bench to go into this green park, to really try and do something that would be a kind of spark and a kind of exclamation point. And it ties in with the colors that Deborah was using for her stuff. And ultimately became a product that is being sold now at Janet at Sea as part of our Not Neutral line, except you can't get it in pink. Only the park gets pink. So another interesting project that started up about the same time, this is Century City, at least the way Welton Beckett originally envisioned it. It always just amazes me to look at this. It quickly devolved into not being that, and really became the sort of quintessential sort of office park based on 1960s sort of car-driven values. And it really was thought of at the time that you could shop in one place and work in another place and live in another place, all near, but you actually drive your car between them. And in the original planning for Century City, there was virtually no allowance for pedestrians. There are these enormous super blocks and virtually no way to navigate between them. When we came on, Westfield hired us to develop a new plan for their shopping center, which we originally showed them the picture of Babe the pig up there and said, you know, you got to do something more than put lipstick on this pig. And they were pretty much up for that. But they had this problem in our minds of, they basically just put their Westfield stamp on everything to give identity for Westfield, and we sort of pointed out to them that we thought that was kind of like having $51 bills instead of one $50 bill. I'd rather have the one larger. And so we proposed on the upper right, basically a kind of giant topiary Westfield topiary sign as a brand mark out that would be on Santa Monica Boulevard, which they all got really excited about for a while, and then ultimately just couldn't stand not having their same brand. So that part didn't happen. But where the old theater used to be, we remodeled that and created a second floor. Created a new theater at the south end, and basically started to make this into a much denser sort of shopping experience, including a new, what they call dining terrace. They would not let us call it a food court. That had great outdoor areas and views back to the city. This actually starts to feel like an actual urban place when you're up there. And additionally, we had to insert canopies for the new escalators and develop new paving throughout, and these planters that have integrated lighting and seats, as well as a new entry onto Constellation that provided accessibility into the center that it never had before. From that, we basically were asked to develop a plan for Century City more broadly, and for Westfield to continue its expansion. Those two things kind of came together in what we called the greening plan for Century City. And it was based on understanding that the subway was coming here, and that the pedestrian traffic was going to be growing hopefully enormously in the future. And so we proposed a series of amenities for pedestrians, including wider sidewalks and more seating and bus stops, as well as asserting different locations and trying to advocate for active uses on the street. We demonstrated different locations that
things like restaurants and cafes could actually be put into the street, as well as increasing and developing a more beautiful landscape and potentially adding art that would be integrated in with the overall landscape, and ultimately resulting in a kind of 21st century new identity for Century City. In the plan here, you can see in the ultimate master plan we developed for them connects the rest of the center out to Santa Monica Boulevard and to where the subway stop is ultimately going to be, down by the Century Plaza. And then we were also at this point asked by the Century Plaza people to help them redevelop the Century Plaza and become the landscape architects for that project, which is going to have a pair of new high-rise towers to the west of the existing Yamasaki building that Harry Cobb has designed as a kind of counterpoint to the existing Twin Towers. You can see in the ultimate build-out of the master plan, there's a kind of meandering garden street that goes out to Santa Monica Boulevard on the west side, and there's a more direct connection between department stores that really is the kind of typical connection between the mall kinds of department stores. And inserted into that is a 40-story residential tower, which we explored sort of how we would make this into a Los Angeles tower, and came to an understanding that at 40 stories, here in LA and probably in most places, outdoor space is probably not really very useful. But everybody wants to have some connection to outdoors in Los Angeles. And so we were proposing that there be a kind of conservatory at the top of the buildings, and then as you work your way down, a series of different kinds of balconies that would be first kind of an innie balcony, and then on the bottom third of the building, an alley that would allow you to really have an outdoor space in a place on the building that would be more conducive to it. So then this is a view of the corner of Avenue of the Stars and Constellation, where the subway is going to come up. And this is the base of the new hotel and the landscape going up to what are going to be the towers in the backside of it. So, thanks. There's something completely different now. Not so far from Century City. It's, a home I designed for my wife and I. This was what was there when we bought it. It was a 1930s Spanish house that was really falling apart. And we were able to tear it down, deconstruct it, which I'm going to say to you guys that it's a very good idea. We actually were able to deconstruct this and send nothing to the landfill, and were able to get a nice tax write-off by donating all the materials to Habitat for Humanity. So it was a win-win. This is what the house looked like right after we built it. It's 3 levels. The ground floor is built into the hillside so that I could stay underneath the height limit. There's an apartment down here for my 2 kids, for them to come and go. I can shut the door on that, and they can come and go. They've got a door on the side, and I never have to see them, or they don't have to see me, which pleases them. And the main floor is all glass. It's really open to the garden, and the top floor is much sort of more private. There's a kind of corrugated aluminum screen that wraps the entire house. When you get to the backyard, the bottom floor is all underground. The main level is now all at grade, and then the screen wraps around, and there are outdoor porches here with screens that open up. A living room facing out onto the street with our memory wall here of all sorts of different stuff from our lives. And the back really feels like you're living in the outdoors in the garden. The screens have a perforated water jet cut Hebrew lettering on them that is that basically is continuous in here and is kind of broken up. It flip-flops from being red on the inside to being red on the outside. Projects really great shadows on the inside. And I have to give my wife credit. I was sort of inspired by her veil on the one hand, and on the other hand, this one day we were debating what the content of that pattern should be. I was thinking it might be sort of a kind of leaf pattern or something from the landscape. And she's the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and is very involved in Jewish causes and really loves Hebrew as a script. And so she came up with this, which is basically the word ahava in Hebrew, which means love. So it translates into this on the interior, which I get to wake up to every morning. And has this kind of transparency, translucency at night that is really very wonderful. And I have a house that's wrapped in love. As Kevin mentioned in passing, I spent 7 years at Universal Studios. And while I was there, I did probably a dozen projects with Mark Rios and his office. As Kevin noted, I met Mark when I was at Frank Gehry's office. He was the landscape architect for Eli Broad's house. But because he's also an architect, he fit a particular niche for what I needed at Universal sometimes, which was projects like this where it's really an architecture piece, but in fact the project is mostly a landscape and civil sort of site project. So there were a whole bunch of those kinds of infrastructural pieces, bridges, other kinds of signage things that we did together while I was there. They were also the design architects for the Terminator 2 attraction and the plaza with pop jet fountains out in front of it. And one of the other things that the office has done a lot of over the years are childcare centers. So they developed a childcare center for Universal. A big part of my job there was developing a master plan for the property here in LA. And for political reasons, that never actually happened. But so when I left and came to Mark's office in 2005 or so, they called me up and said, you know, that master plan you've done, we really want to do another one, and we really mean it this time. We actually want to get it approved. So we did this plan that carved out a big chunk of what was then back lot for residential use to try and see the property as being really a mixed-use property related to the fact that right here is where the Universal City subway station is on the Red Line. So that it's a very centrally located place. And we thought that there could be a much more significant kind of density there. The community sort of thought otherwise, and so we ultimately had to delete the residential portions of the master plan. But we still, 2013, took us 8 years to get this approved. Because it's both in LA County and in LA City. So it was really quite the process. We continue to do work there at Universal. We're looking at potential office buildings in different locations in the site. And are just literally completing a tunnel that's going to put the big, tall tower over here on the actual back lot, or on the lot of the studio, that will provide cart traffic through and security. And on the other end, we just recently finished this bridge and landscape and plaza coming over to what's known as the Brokaw Center for NBC's news. And then, again, just recently opening is another piece of the infrastructure we did there, a pedestrian bridge that literally is linking. This is the Red Line station over here in Lancashire. It needed to link this to both this corner for pedestrians and buses, as well as this corner for people who wanted to go up the hill to the rest of the attractions. So we kind of created this arcing bridge with elevators and escalators and stairs. It's like this. So you come out of the subway station that was built, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago now, and just sort of wind your way up onto the bridge and across to the property. It's got this sort of V-shaped to it that is structurally very efficient and allowed us to open it up to the sky, so it felt like a much friendlier kind of pedestrian experience. We also just last week literally got a master plan approved for Paramount Studios. Another one, we sort of got this project from working at Universal for so long. Some of the people moved to Paramount and took us with them. This one only took about 5 years to get approved. Its big sensitivities were about the historic resource of the old studio, and you can see the old gate from the original studio there that we frame. But we create a contemporary kind of office campus in the front end for a creative campus. And then, again, fairly recently, we just got approval for from city planning for the LAX north side. All the property, this is LAX here, all the property to the north of it, which was basically 400 acres that was condemned in the 1970s because of environmental concerns about the single-family homes that were here and the fact that they were all located such that there was way too much noise and pollution, and so they were basically all ripped down. So this plan provides 2.5 million square feet of both airport support and some creative office campuses, as well as then creating a kind of separation from the existing residential neighborhood and a kind of pedestrian paseo that connects the entire piece, as well as this area that separates the development. In Playa Vista, last year, we opened the building they call the resort. It's the second community center in Playa Vista. It's part of their phase 2 development that's just starting to finish up now. It was located in a place that was originally supposed to be a park. This is one of the main streets, and this is another in the phase 1, and so this site sort of was just at the hinge point of that, and so we thought that the building should accommodate that connection and be organized around it. It also had to include a kind of park as a part of the overall site. You can see the building is tucked back in here. Has a green roof that sort of wraps around, as well as solar panels on other parts of it, and has a great deal of open space for pools and just sort of hanging out at the community center. It all opens up. It's a LEED Platinum project, and has this kind of continuous indoor-outdoor feel to the whole place. Just looking down that diagonal path through the building. And on the second floor, there are a series of classrooms that connect down and across. There's also courtyards we introduced into the center of things so that the spaces wrap around them, and they create light courts that bring daylight into the building and air as well. As well as with the light, they really open up the space to make it much more transparent feeling. You can see Greg Kuchinowski, some of you may know, one of the lead designers on the project. The main pool area here, and there are, I think, 5 different pools in the project. We also invented another kind of module for seating that is used throughout the lobbies and the public spaces. So this is another product that you can get through Not Neutral. It's designed by Amy Less and my partner Julie Smith Clementi. Another building some of you may remember, not too long ago, it looked like this, on the Sunset Strip, right across from the old Tower Records. This is a building that Barry Diller owns and is the headquarters for his Interactive Corporation here in Los Angeles. Barry is an long-time client of ours. My partner Mark designed his landscape for his estate and a screening room for him, and it's worked with him for many years. We actually did one attempt at remodeling the building on the lower floor back in 2002 that didn't go anywhere, and that's when he decided to locate the main building in New York and hired Frank Gehry to do that project. So Frank got to steal one of my clients. So Barry came to us, called us one day about 3 years ago and said, I really hate this building, what can I do to it? I don't want to spend a lot of money, but I really want to do something different. So we looked at it and thought about it, and one of the things about this building that we found was that it had 5 levels of parking underground, and that they were continually pumping water from the basement. It was being permanently dewatered, and just putting that out into the storm drain. So we thought that was potentially a great opportunity to use that to create a kind of landscape that would run up the building. And that we could paint the building white, really transform it with the green across it, and create a kind of figural shape that reflected the hillside beyond, and also works with the way Sunset Boulevard sort of turns right at this location. We also redid the plaza in a way that opened it up so that you can actually inhabit it. Ran the paving inside, created new seating, a new lobby, and new elevators. So one of our newest projects to open is Columbia Square. It's the original CBS headquarters on the West Coast. It was built in 1938, designed by William Lescaz. It's probably one of the best examples of the international style in Los Angeles. So we were introduced to the client by our executive architects of many projects, including the endowment, House and Robertson. David Kilroy was the representative from Kilroy here in LA, and asked us to take the entire block and see what we could do with it. He had entitlements from a previous design that crashed and burned in the recession. about 500,000 square feet of office space, over 200 units of residential space, and also a hotel. And David's question to us was, how could he use that to best effect and also get through all the remaining approvals with the city? And really the focus in a lot of ways had to be on the historic buildings out on Sunset Boulevard and how they could really still be a significant part of the project. We developed a plan that really sort of picked up on the courtyard as the important element here that organized this frontage historically, and then created a series of other courtyards as you go through the site, and made connections back to Selma and over here to what is ultimately the subway stop at Hollywood and Vine. It seemed like the residential tower portion of this wanted to be back on this corner of the site, and that we originally were thinking of this as potentially 3 or 4 different building sites. They had asked us if we could develop something that would be feasible. So having individual buildings would help with that. In the end, they built the entire thing all at once. And they've been very lucky and I guess skilled. They have Noya House, a group out of New York that's a kind of combination WeWorks and Soho House all kind of combined. You rent office space from them, but they curate who they let rent space. And so Noya House is occupying the entire historic radio building. And then they've got some restaurant tenants in the business building. Viacom is taking the entire office space on the east side. They developed a relationship with Brad Korzen of the Coors Group for managing the residential building as a proper, that's what his brand is called, apartments. So, let's see, they hung a sign on our building, which we didn't like, but hopefully will go away soon. And apparently they're being very successful in leasing it. And the entire site is pretty much leased up at this point. We broke the buildings down to sort of have a base that was in scale with a historic building. And it also allowed us to really see and create identities for potential tenants at that scale. And then let the residential tower be a tower and have its own sort of presence. It's really sort of graphic on the side that's facing the freeway and sort of much more broken up on the side that's facing the rest of Hollywood. You come out of the garage at this level, which the site falls off 17 feet from one side to the other, which allowed parking to be basically on the grade level of Sunset Boulevard and allowed you to come out. We created this smaller building due to some really quirky development agreements the previous group had made. And I think Barbara Bester has just finished developing a design for Fender to come in here and have their world headquarters here. So Fender Guitar in Hollywood. And a significant part of the idea was to really create places for people to be able to work outdoors and to connect the indoors and the outdoors for that purpose. And so we've developed some special furniture that allows you to actually plug in laptops or have meetings and whatever in different places in the landscape. Also, now about 3 or 4 years ago, we were asked to do a competition for the redevelopment of a site in Sacramento that was, as you can see, 6-block shopping center at the end of K Street here. Capitol is right here. This was sold by Westfield during the recession to some guys in San Francisco for $22 million, all 6 blocks. But this is kind of what it looked like when we came there. It was kind of pieced together by John Jurdy and his troops back in the 1980s. And before we got too far in what we were doing, the developer came to us and said, you know, could I fit an arena on this site also? Okay, I guess so. Well, let me see. And so we were able to actually shoehorn it in here. They ultimately hired a specialist in arenas, AECOM, to design that building, but we developed a master plan for the rest of the site and the retail, and are in the process of building most of what's on the ground and this main piece in the middle, which has residential, hotel, and retail. Also has some office space in it too now. So at the ground level, K Street came in here, and the arena essentially had to intrude into the space, but we were able to keep a continuous kind of retail store frontage in here and create much more of a kind of plaza space where that would then open up into the arena here. And then there's a pedestrian connection through here that goes off to the train station that way. And then this way to Old Town Sacramento. There's an old Macy's that we had to all sort of work around. All the yellow then is retail. And so you can see the building became a kind of stacking up of all these different programs and connecting back to the plaza and the street. In section, you can see residential coming up on top, a hotel, which is going to be a Kimpton in the middle. We developed a series of terraces for the hotel and residential amenities that would then open into the plaza for the arena, so that this will be a really spectacular kind of place that faces south. And then the hotel has a 3-story lobby that opens from the street into the plaza here and connects directly across the arena. We decided that in order to try and break the building into a kind of scale of the city surrounding it, we wanted to give expression to each of the different program pieces. So the residential is a little different from the hotel, which is a little different than the pieces of the base, and that's all different than really the retail that wraps around. So that it has that kind of variety and richness and diversity of expression. It is under construction. It ties together with some of the material on the outside as a kind of precast concrete that shows up in different forms around the building. On the street side, we skewed this top residential piece off of the hotel so that from below you get that kind of precariousness and a little understanding of the difference in the pieces. And again, from the street, you can look through and you'll be able to see not only the lobby, but all the way through to the arena. So it's supposed to be finished next year, in time for next basketball season. So this was a project in San Francisco where we were given this model and asked by the client, which was Kilroy, if we could just kind of help the architects out and tweak what they were doing, because this was really too institutional looking for them and the kind of tenants that they were looking for. But we had to keep the overall massing of the thing because that had gone through a series of approvals already. But the challenge was to actually make it something that their tenants would like. We sort of, this is in Mission Bay in San Francisco, so we looked at the history of the site, and this was originally the shipbuilding area of San Francisco. And so it was very industrial, and in fact, on the other side of our building site, backside of it is actually very industrial today. So we took that form and broke it up into a series of pieces that have a kind of exaggerated scales of 2-story and 3-story sort of windows in some places, as well as punched windows in others, and created a kind of expression that's much more gritty and of the kind of urban environment there in Mission Bay. We were able to get it approved by the Design Review Board in San Francisco in one hearing, which is apparently fairly unheard of. Everybody seems to have liked this, and again, it's just starting to come out of the ground, and I think Kilroy's already got it entirely leased. 280 backs up to it, so the view from the freeway will be significant. And it plays off of some of the forms from San Francisco and the area, but really makes something completely different out of it. So its ultimate name here is the Exchange on 16th. With the freeway back here. And it's another example of creative office buildings, and what we've come to find people are really looking for in these buildings are the ability to have this adjacency to outdoor space from the work environment. As well, all of these projects today, as you probably know, really have significant requirements for how you deal with water in a responsible way. And using landscape as a way of filtering that and sometimes storing that is also, and using it is important. In this project, we were able to create some roof decks by virtue of the different heights that are terraces right off of the workspaces, as well as other entry courts at grade. So, last project. This is something that we just won in a competition this summer. We were selected over BIG, which we were very happy about. It was, again, a project for Kilroy, and we were initially disappointed that they wanted us to compete for it, but you know, this is the way the world works. It's a project where we made the case to them that in San Francisco it's a very rich environment, and this was a very big project, 2 million square feet, and for that kind of scale we thought this couldn't just be one thing, that to have a sort of large 2 million square foot uniform building wasn't the right thing, that it needed to have an expression of diversity of San Francisco, of the city, of the culture, and that we needed to employ all of our skills to really make that happen as a whole place. The site is in the south of Market area. Market Street's here, the 101 freeway comes through here, and our site is there. The program basically is represented in these bars, and so you can see it's significantly office space, but it had a mixture of other uses, including the fact that we had to recreate a space for the flower market and include that as part of the ground floor of the site. It's so large, though, that the Planning Commission has a series of dictates about connections that needed to be made through the site, including this one that goes east-west and connects a block over here to what's becoming a new subway through San Francisco, an extension of BART that's the Central Soma line. Then we saw the opportunity to really bring a sense of, again, California's rich outdoor environment to the building, especially it being a flower market. Just the notion of that as a brand of a place needed to somehow get an expression. And the area in South Market has very little for outdoor space. So our notion was to basically raise the basic office block and split it open, and then to break the other pieces of the program into other readable sort of forms, as well as occupy all the different spaces with landscapes, so that even on the roof we would have a kind of continuous outdoor space. And that the more we could really create that outdoor space and link it to the community around us, the better it would be for everybody. So, and I have to give credit here to, we inherited a few years ago one of Tom's former employees, a guy named Ben Tome. And Ben was responsible for really leading the design of this and did, I think, a great job. So the many refers to the diversity of expressions that we wanted to create here. And not to say that it's a lot of different expressions, but that at this scale of the whole block, it couldn't be just a singular one. So we have what we call the Market Hall building here, which has a great retail space at the base of it. There's a tower back here that vacillates between being office space and potentially residential. And then a series of office spaces here that are agglomerated in a way that allows you to read them as potentially separate buildings, but in fact are all connected together. So at the street level, you would have Brandon Street out here. The Market Hall opens up, has retail both in kiosk and in closed stores. And there's an atrium in the middle of that building that connects both down to parking as well as up into the building. And then there's a space between the Blocks building and the Market Hall that is really analogous to the kind of alleys that you find in South of Market. I don't know if many of you have been there, but there are lots of these small streets that have become really pedestrianized in the last few years. The Market Hall building has office space up here, core of elevators that comes down, glassed in at the base, retail space that spills into this alley back here, as well as having the office building entries sort of spilled down into it. And then a view from the tower back over. The Market Hall building has a developed roof as a park with a couple pavilions that would provide restaurant amenities. The Blocks buildings have additional gardens on them. And then the tower, we think, should be a much more sort of sinuous form that is really distinctive in the skyline. Let's see if I don't know if I can get this to work. This will work. Okay. A little animation here of moving through it. Coming from off 4th Street, down through with retail on both sides, office space above, tower beyond. So I'm going to end with this. I was hoping to show you our latest encounter with Grand Avenue, but it's not really ready for prime time yet. Actually, Cindy saw it just the other day. We are actually executing the plaza renovation, and we're very excited about it. Hopefully that'll be done in about a year and a half. So, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm curious, your mid-career move to go to Universal, what it was like working as an architect at a firm, at a company not really devoted to architecture, and what drew you there from Frank's office?
It's a very sort of long story. That's why I kind of left it all out. My time at Frank's office was great, and also at a certain point, working for somebody like Frank, you have to decide doing Frank's work forever. Frank was really good to me, gave me enormous opportunities, but even if you wanted to, his brand, if you will, was so strong that you couldn't escape it within the context of that office. So I had to leave and do something else. And I actually started trying to do work on my own. And at the time it was the early 90s, and there wasn't a lot of work around. And I also came to realize that my value to the world was much greater in another condition. I went to Universal actually looking for a project to design, and instead they said, why don't you come and work directly for us, and we'll give you all the work you can design. And I said no to that a couple of times, and we finally made the offer after 15 years. So it was very interesting, and I would recommend it as a piece of a career, being on the client side, because I then hired lots of architects and gave them direction, and it's given me a whole other perspective on our profession and how to conduct myself as an architect.
Can you say something? You're involved in this UCLA, this immense amount of city, and it's embedded in, and you're an unusual person to lecture at universities as a practicing academics. I'm curious, the students here, how much they can even grasp of your world and then the incredible kind of assistance in your day-to-day life having to do with the forces that you have to work with, especially with the current academic environment, let's say, current being maybe the last couple of decades, which is ubiquitous, where they would never touch just about anything you talk about. It operates at an aloof field, but a highly conceptual world that either purposely, intentionally, or by coincidence, just about doesn't touch anything you talk about. What do you, and then these are the people that, and then with that, Frank brought you in fresh out of school and gave you the keys. That's the thing. So you're a kid right out of UCLA, which is also quite unusual. He just says, here are the keys, take over the office. Right? And I remember what I had doing at home. Wow, Frank's got, he obviously believes in young people, and he's looking at somebody who says, a smart guy driving, and whatever you were, 23, 4, 5, you're as smart as you're to get. You just didn't even work that, because this is kind of tough stuff, and you're negotiating with a very difficult world, and you're involved in the private sector in a very particular time of capitalism when it rules, right? And you're in a day-to-day negotiation with that, trying to ride through what architecture is, and where we are in that world as we continue to the formation of cities. And in very tough environments, especially LA, which you could claim as maybe one of the tougher environments. It's hard to even make architecture exist here, if you don't know, right? And because really nobody, and I'm saying this very particularly in terms of the use of language, nobody gives a fuck. Really, very few people, right? And
Or if they do, they in fact are generally trying, what they care about is being protected with what they already have. It's an enormously conservative environment in that respect, which was sort of shocking given what my perception of LA was originally when I came here. And I think in the duration of the time I've been here, it's actually become more that way. When we first were practicing, I think there are more people that were willing to take a chance on things than there are today. And part of that is also, you build a house for $200,000. Now it's multi-million-dollar propositions. But I think that, I'm not quite sure, there's a question that you asked.
not either.
But I mean, to say you have to have, certain compelling drive and interest in making things and get a satisfaction out of that. I have to say, I get so much of a charge out of walking onto a construction site and seeing what we've created actually going out of the ground. And it's just, that's one of those things that I can't really articulate probably well enough, because it's a feeling of
I'm saying that
satisfaction.
because 90% of you are going here. It's called reality. And I feel it's some obligation of the institution, and it's an obligation that I feel personally that I have to confront. I can't ignore. And because that's where the profession is.
And I have to tell you,
there's this kind of leap today, right? That I think it's important that you have to understand that if you're committing X amount of years to architectural education, this is where you're going. And it's so rare we actually see kind of a picture of reality. That's just right.
well, we have a lot of people in the office, some of whom have been teaching here in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think are as astute and able to sort of talk academics as anyone. But at the same time, they're also able to navigate this kind of work and actually make things happen and have the drive and determination to do that. I think it in the end is really the question of what motivates you. And the work we do is enormously satisfying to me in terms of just the process of what it yields. It also allows me to channel, we do a lot of pro bono work. We do work for nonprofits. We do things that we believe, even if we're being paid, are motivated in large part by our interest in the city and doing good stuff. So that's also a component of it. At the same time, we all are trying to make a living and have certain interest in doing well and having a business and making that end of things work out too. So we are fortunate and unusual, and it's probably part of what's allowed us to grow the way we have. We have some of the wealthiest clients in Los Angeles as some of our clients. And that's been very helpful. It allows us to do certain kinds of experimental work in some ways. Sometimes it needs to be very conservative work. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I can't show you because we have non-disclosure agreements with
is has a hard time focusing on the experiential aspects of design. And I remember one long time ago, I can't, anyway, there were a whole group of architects working on it. And there was a landscape architect. And the dialogue at the table, 8 or 10 architects and one landscape, was dominated by the landscape. Who said, well, look, people are going to be walking over here, and they're going to be looking over there, and you need to create a sense of entrance. And his perceptions completely dominated the master plan for condition. These were fairly big architects, some of the and it was very revealing that the aspect of human habitation, the humanities, experiential qualities at the pedestrian level for urban experiences, urban vitality, are far more important than facilities. And you've got maybe 3 stories of pedestrian experience. And frankly, nobody gives that word that Tom just mentioned about the rest of it among the lay population. And so I can see very clearly that that element is the element that, partly because Mark is a landscape architect, and from the inception of the firm, I think it's that you know, your work at Universal had a lot to do with the experience of people at Universal. And I think that's the foundation for all of it.
I mean, it'd be interesting if somebody emerged from academia that was focused on an understanding of architecture as an experience, as opposed to as an abstract geometrical exercise. The thing to me is that the geometrical aspects of architecture, which is always going to be there, but we have lots of tools to help us with that. We're creating really complex things, but at the end of the day, as Fred's saying, it's a thing that's out there in the world. How you experience it is really what is going to impact most people, not really how it's formed. It's something that's that creates an experience.
So, tying in those two, what I wanted to say, not being arbitrary, kind of looking at a different point of view, but I think part of this is really about the efficiency of building and just finances and how people put projects together, and it's more about being efficient and cost saving, and in the sense that they're driven more by making it efficient, bringing it in on budget, rather than they are about having a creative exercise, which kind of puts the creative and the larger, more idealistic sort of point of view at odds with the overall structure of trying to get a project together like that. So I mean, for the architect, it puts them in a difficult position, because you're having to argue the more societal benefit at the same time you're trying to argue the creative and putting things into the project that make it more interesting than just putting another box.
Well, I mean, it's one of the things we all struggle with. Actually had projects where clients said, much as one initiative, don't worry about it. And every single one of those came back to this budget was an issue. Really. So it is one of those things that has to be a part of how you conceptualize things. I think it's someone who's doing that. But at the same time, it's not something that you can actually, it's not, because it is ubiquitous, it's not something that you really need to have as the focus of things. It needs to not necessarily be the generative thing. I mean, I get what you're saying, but it's been long enough. That was actually where Universal was really useful for me in terms of actually separating. It was part of the problem of trying to go out immediately open my own practice. Was I had grown to work in a way that was so, plugged into a specific way of working, a specific kind of aesthetic that I needed to get away from that. And Universal gave me a great segue. And actually working with Brent was also really helpful in that regard, because Brent's way of working is so completely different than Frank's. So those gave me distance. And I will say, to the students in the audience, I was really fortunate in getting the opportunities I got early on in my career. But on the other hand, the work I showed you didn't start to show up until I'd been out of graduate school with my Mark II degree for 20 years. So this is it's a profession that takes a very long time to actually learn, because to build a building takes a long time. To design it, build it, understand what was good and bad about it, that cycle just, it takes time. And so your learning can be maybe accelerated today by the fact that you can so incredibly detailed model something, understand how it goes together, maybe more fascinating than you could have when I was in school. But to actually experience that and understand what it means to negotiate with a contractor for something, get it approved by a city, and have a client screaming at you, all those other things, it just takes time. And you have to be up for that experience. Goes back to you.
I have a question. The modernist challenge of, being able to take on design at any scale, cities is a persistent one. But easier said than done. And really not very many practices take on the stuff that can be built from design scale. Just what you're reflecting on managing that as kind of the overall kind of total work. How is that done at the kind of office level? What are your thoughts?
It's hard. There's some guys from the office here who will tell you everybody's working really hard in the office today. They are often asked to work one day on a landscape project, another day on a building, and another day on a planning project. We're trying to solve that by how we're reorganizing the office. So there's one thing with 5 partners to have 100 people, it's still like, you can think of it as studios of 20 people. It's not actually how it works, but from a management standpoint, it's not so hard. But as it gets bigger than that, we're looking at other ways of trying to organize things. And one of the ways we're trying to stay away from is trying to organize things more strictly in disciplines. But really, in some ways, working ourselves in smaller things, particularly kind of scales, things that cut across many different disciplines. So we'll see how that goes. But it's a real challenge. And we've developed a lot of tools to help us, as everybody does, to manage things. And again, part of what's allowed us to do that is when being reasonably successful at what we're doing. So we're not always a shoestring budget that says we can't spend. It is one of the places where we've invested in ourselves and doing things like designing products that we're actually launching ourselves. We're actually about to launch a book that compiles 30 years of our work. It's interesting to see how that gets received. And so I can't say that there's a formula for it. I will say, I
think part of what makes it work for us as a specific practice is the fact that we all have